And so we are now at the stage of the project where students are starting their, so the late track are starting working on their reports. And so one of the things they need to do first is to sort of analyze the competition, analyze the market, see who the competitors are, and obviously see how the client company compares to the competition. So there are different ways to approach this task. One of them would be to conduct so-called SWOT analysis, which we will talk about today. But also maybe we'll take a broader look after talking about SWOT specifically. Maybe we'll take a broader look and think about or provide students some suggestions as to how they should approach this bigger task, this chapter of the report, what else they can do to better understand how their client compares to the competition and fits in the market, in the industry, and how they can lay out the foundation for the subsequent sections of the report by analyzing basically the competitive position of their client. And so here we have two professors with us, Bruce Kilber and John Lax. Maybe it would be best if you gentlemen introduce yourselves in terms of your area of expertise, current location. I don't have all that information, so students might want to know. I'm not sure in which order we want to go. John, I guess maybe.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay. Yeah, Bruce Kibler. I'm sitting here in Erie, Pennsylvania at, let's see, I have my Gannon University. My area of expertise is, I guess, international management and strategic planning. I spent over 20 years doing strategic planning and business development for major telecommunications and IT companies, predominantly in Europe.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hi, I'm John Lax in St. Leo University.
No, I feel like
it's actually in the 90s here in the Bay Area, but they air condition our buildings so cold that we all have to wear sweatshirts indoors. And so my background is also practitioner. I come out of the IT background. I'm a marketer, and my academic interest or area is and background, professional background, is primarily branding and specifically academic branding. So, I, like Bruce, worked both domestically and internationally during my career.
Wonderful. Then, so as we discussed, let's start with this little presentation overview by John on specifically SWOT analysis, what it is and how to do it. And students, as always, if you have questions, you can type them up in the Q&A window, or if you would like to ask your questions in person, raise your hand, press a button that looks like raised hand. And so if we have time, we will add you to this virtual meeting room, and you will be able to engage with us directly by asking your questions, getting the answers. And let's see how this discussion goes. So John, then maybe you will start with a little overview of SWOT analysis, and we'll see how the discussion progresses.
Perfect. So I think a good place to start is that the things we talk about in performing a SWOT for the firm you've been assigned to and are doing your project for can in many cases also be applied to your competition. So if you understand how to do an environmental analysis and then transition that to a SWOT, the things that we'll be talking about for the next few minutes can be used just as easily, although the research may be a little more difficult, to analyze your competition as it is the firm that you are working with directly. So I'm going to assume that all of you have been exposed to SWOT, and we don't need to talk about the basic concept. What I'd like
not necessarily.
Not necessarily?
Yeah, we have students from 72 countries.
Oh,
most of them are business students, but some of them may be non-student participants. So there is a good chance some of them didn't have a course where a SWOT analysis was mentioned. So maybe even a little of basics would be helpful here.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that. Bad assumption on my part. So SWOT is a standardized method for analyzing the firm that you are working with. And it's divided into two groups, internal factors and external factors. And the internal factors are the S and the W. So it's SWOT is SWOT. And so those internal factors is the S, which is strengths. These are things that the firm is good at. And so if you have exceptional technology, that might be a strength for your firm. Weaknesses, the W, are things that your firm doesn't do as well, or might be something that impedes you from achieving your organizational objectives. So it might be that you're a very young firm and lack an experienced staff, might be a weakness for your organization. The external factors are the O and the T that stand for opportunities and threats. So opportunities are things that are in the external business environment that your firm may be able to capitalize on to grow or become more profitable or achieve your objectives. And so if the business environment that you're moving into, the market that you are moving into, is growing very quickly, has a very fast growing middle class, for example, that would be an opportunity that is external to your firm, but that you can take advantage of. A threat is the opposite of that. Perfect. That's a great slide. The threat are things that are the opposite of that. So these are things that are in the external business environment that might be a threat to you achieving your organizational objectives, growing the firm, being profitable. And so an example of that might be some of the things that are going on in the world right now with trade sanctions, tariffs, things that you have little to no control over, but might be a threat to you being successful in your project. So the important to kind of sum this up is remember that the S and the W, the strength and the weaknesses, are internal to your firm, and therefore you have some control over those things. The external, the O's and the T's, opportunities and threats, are external to your firm, and you probably have relatively little control over those things. So I'll pause there for any questions that the students or anything that Bruce might like to add.
Well, the only thing that I would add is that the problem that I've seen with SWOTs quite often is that, especially from a student atmospheres, they think that they fill out the chart with the S's, the W's, the O's, and the T's, and that they're finished. And I know that you're going to go on with this, but that's not the end. That's just the very beginning. And there's a whole analytical stretch that comes after that. And I really liked, and I would like to emphasize also what John was saying about the fact that when you do a SWOT, it is not just for doing it for yourself. As you are identifying the competition out there, you should be trying to perform a SWOT for the competition as well to see, how the mix of your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are mixing with theirs, so you can position yourself appropriately.
That's absolutely true. And I'll just add that in some classes in the past, I've even had my students do a SWOT on themselves in preparation for transitioning into job fairs, or we traditionally have sort of an interview period towards the end of our spring semester. And so I make them do a self SWOT, which kind of has some interesting outcomes.
So you would think self-SWOT for me as an individual?
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting idea. Why not, I guess. Yeah.
Right. And so it gets some interesting results, particularly for our seniors. So you would think Bruce and I had practiced this, because what he just brought up is exactly where I'd like to take us for the next couple of minutes. As Bruce said, when we do these in class or we do these in student projects, the students typically brainstorm, and they come up with a list that goes into each of those 4 categories. And then, exactly as Bruce said, oh, we're done now. We don't have to do anything else. And in fact, you are just getting started. And so I'd like to share with you a piece that comes before you brainstorm those bullet points. And that's typically what they are, bullet points, much like Voss showed us a few minutes ago. And so a piece that comes before that, and then a couple of pieces that come after it. So one of the problems with the brainstorming and the SWOT is that it lacks a foundation. So we get together and we start brainstorming, and we come up with these bullets, but there's not necessarily any evidence or any foundation for where those bullets came from. So I always have my students take a step back and do a PEST analysis. And so for those, again, that aren't familiar with that, PEST It's really easy to remember. Just remember it's kind of pesty. And so PEST stands for political, economic, social, and technology. And those are and then there's also a version called PESTLE that's probably to go into today. But if you can remember that you want to analyze the political environment, and typically that might also include laws. So an example right now might be, again, the tariffs and trade sanctions that we're experiencing around the world. The second is economics, and that might also be the tariffs, but the example that I used in class just this week was the threat of recession, a global recession, mild as it might be. We're seeing that more and more in the media. Many economists believe that we're perhaps headed for a mild recession, both domestically and globally. And the S is social. And so the slide that Vas has up on the screen about millennials and Gen Zers was exactly the example I was going to use. Is the way they behave as consumers is far different than us old guys, us boomers, and how we buy things. So social would be anything that is related to consumer preferences, changes in consumer behavior, what customers are asking for, and emerging social changes such as the changing roles of women and minorities might be examples of social changes. And then technology, we could talk all day about technology. Everything that's happening in e-media, the changing roles of cars, and the batteries that is on the slide right now are excellent examples. So the reason I always have my students start with doing a PEST is to make them think about the things that are relevant to their project or their product that fall into each of these categories, and then using that as an evidence-based method to come up with a list of things that goes into each of the 4 SWOT categories. So I'll pause here for any questions or comments from Bruce or Vas.
So I guess if I were to add something to that is, you can certainly go, many steps deeper than that. The class atmosphere of learning is one thing, but when you're out, really doing this kind of thing, you really need to get real information and start analyzing, when you're looking at the other companies, for instance. There are annual reports out there. You can go into the Edgar database of the SEC. It's critical that you get real information to fill these things out, as opposed to just brainstorming.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't agree more. And so hence why I always emphasize the evidence-based analysis is give me facts, and then you can take those facts and turn them into your educated opinions about what goes into the SWOT. So that's an excellent point.
Would it be a good idea to take a company that everybody knows, I don't know, McDonald's or Toyota, and just do a very quick example of SWOT and maybe PEST analysis, just a few pointers of what could fall into each category and what to do with that?
I think that's a great idea. How about Disney?
Okay, let's take Disney. Everybody knows what Disney is.
Right, I'm in Florida, so.
Okay, let's do Disney then. So just as a quick introduction and perhaps, sample of what could go into each category and what to do with those numbers or that information.
So if we were thinking of, and I thought you were talking about the SWOT, not the PEST, correct?
Either one or both.
Okay. So if we were talking about SWOT, and again, living here as we do, we get an awful lot of coverage about Disney. Probably their strength is their brand or their reputation. They do many things that they might work on, and we can get to those. But their brand image as the happiest place on earth and being perhaps the industry leader in customer service is pretty unassailable. Bruce?
I would certainly agree with that. I think they also, they certainly have a financial strength as well that is pretty unparalleled in the entertainment industry.
Yep, they're the largest employer in Florida.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the largest private land.
The largest employer in Florida, you just said?
Yes. Yeah, outside of the government.
Wow. I've been there a few times, but I didn't realize they have so many employees. I thought maybe like 1,000 or so.
At the greater facility, it's in excess of 50,000 employees.
Wow.
So
Okay.
only the military and the government have a larger employer base.
Interesting. Okay.
If I were thinking of weaknesses, particularly if indeed the economy softens, Disney keeps raising its prices. And they keep raising their prices. And so far, they haven't seemed to hit a point where consumers won't pay for it. But those of us who pay attention to the company, particularly here in the state, think they sooner or later they're going to hit a point where consumers will stop paying well in excess of $100 a day per person to attend. So to take a family of 4 to Disney for a day, by the time you feed them and buy cute hats and the other things that you do at Disney, can easily approach $1,000. And that's a lot for Disney's core audience, which are middle-class families.
And even with that price, I remember you have to stay in line for every ride for sometimes hours, you know, the
Yes.
demand is so high.
Yeah.
So that's why Floridians don't go.
Yeah, but Floridians actually get a discount.
We do, and we still wait till October to go. So if I were thinking of an opportunity, it's one that they have already recently taken advantage of. They bought the Star Wars franchise. And I think they recognize that that's a franchise that goes back to my college days and is still continuing to grow. And they purchased the rights to that franchise and have built an entire part of the theme park around it to attract new visitors. Sooner or later, people get tired of seeing the Magic Kingdom and Epcot. So they took advantage of an opportunity in the growing, continuing popularity of Star Wars. Bruce, anything?
Well, I mean, I think I would add a little bit more to the weaknesses in that. I think there's a potential, weakness there only because they have to maintain their abilities. They have to maintain their abilities. In other words, here they are now. They're buying Star Wars. But you can't just keep buying something that already existed and play off of it. You've got to also create new all the time. And these are huge talents that don't just grow on trees. You've got to build them. You've got to maintain them. It's a strength for them now. But maintaining something like that is highly critical and very, very difficult.
It is. You're absolutely right. I'll just add on a personal note. 3 or 4 years ago, I had a chance to spend a couple of days with their Imagineers. And these are the people who invent all that cool stuff you see there. And some of them are artists and some of them are engineers and some of them are IT guys or people. And they are very proud of that tag Imagineers. And they are very, very fussy about who they bring in. And the recruiting is very, very aggressive. We have a good engineering school at the university down the road from us, a large state school. And they recruit very aggressively at the engineering and IT schools. And then they turn around and hire a bunch of theater majors. So it's an interesting mix.
One question, so when we look at Disney as a company, so they obviously do much more than theme parks. So they also do, make movies. They also lately apparently are thinking about a streaming service similar to Netflix. So would all of that fall into opportunities, or how would you fit it into the SWOT model?
Well, I think that's a good example, and this will happen. And for the students listening in, you may find that some characteristic or attribute of the firm falls into more than one category. And I think that's an excellent example of both a strength and an opportunity. A strength of the firm is that they just create wonderful movies and stage shows. And so they just, recently The Lion King just has been redone for the 3rd or 4th time.
Aladdin.
So they are growing on the strength of that franchise. And so that is, I think, a great example of a strength and an opportunity being one and the same.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Bruce, anything?
Well, I just the fact that that's exactly the whole point of the SWOT is to start, combining the strengths and the opportunities and the, threats and the weaknesses and the threats to see how you can actually go about, doing your job.
Yeah. So another question then, so SWOT is pretty clear. Now, what else can students do? Because SWOT is just one of the models, one of the frameworks for analyzing competition and the client's competitive position. But are there any other things that students could do to better understand how their client fits into this whole world industry market? So any other tips that students can use to better understand the competitive position of their clients so that they can build upon this section as they move on to marketing, to HR, to logistics, and other sections of the report?
Well, it all falls under different, types of models that one can use. One of the most popular, of course, is, Porter's 5 forces model, which is just, analyzing the power or lack thereof of buyers, of sellers, of the potential new entrants, of potential substitutes for whatever it is that you're offering, as well as the overall competition in the industry itself. So there's the 5 forces. But with any model, the first thing that I'm a very critical thinker, and so when the first time I read it, I said, well, this isn't sufficient, because then you go, okay, it's all looking outward. You need to take something else and then look inward. And then, the classic would be looking at something like the resource-based view and say, you have to say, okay, well, the resource-based view is looking at, well, what is it that I have? Who am I? What are the strengths and tools that I have that I can wield that are under my control? And that's basically what the resource-based view is. So then you have an internal and you have an external, locus of control that you're analyzing with 2 other tools. And I could continue on, because that's also insufficient, because then there's all these other things that you could start bringing in that aren't covered by either one of them that we started talking about a little bit with the SWOT, in the legal environment, what's going on politically. There's a whole bunch of other overlays that one can do with it. So you could spend really a lot of time doing this analysis, and if you ever turn out to do this professionally, then that is indeed what you will be doing, is spending really a lot of time gathering information and analyzing these things to figure out what are your strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats out there, and how to approach the market. Look at that! Hey.
Can I ask you this then? So we talked about SWOT model or analysis. We talked about Porter's 5 forces. We talked about PEST analysis. If students wanted to learn more about it and learn how to do it right, how should they go about it? Is it something that they can find online, or is it very specialized literature that they need to buy?
There's plenty of online resources that they can find. This is very autodidactic that they can do here. It's, you can find a chart just like this one for all of these things online without any great trouble. And you can even find them on larger companies. You can actually find these analyses that are already done. So just go to the, even Yahoo Finances has got SWOT analyses and things like that on a lot of major companies out there.
There's a wealth of resources available online. There's nothing secret or about what we're talking about. These are things that are very common to both practitioners and academics. And Bruce is correct. There's lots and lots of resources out there, and you don't need to spend a dime for them. And there's some excellent videos.
Yeah.
They can not only then Google, but also maybe look at on YouTube. Maybe there are some.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I encourage you students to do it. You do not have to use SWOT or PEST or any other analysis in your report. We are only giving you suggestions. But from my experience, if you're trying to sort of reinvent the bicycle and think for yourself how you approach this product or problem, you can miss something. And so those models exist or are popular because they do provide a framework and give you some sort of kind of, a road that you just follow. And this way you make sure that you don't miss anything. And it just allows you to do a much more thorough analysis.
So that's a really good point for the students. So we started this conversation about how would you go about analyzing the firm that you're working for, your competitors in the business environment, and then use that information to make your project more robust and to solve your client's problem. So these are just tools. How you present this information and how you use it in your project is really a decision for you and your team. So as Bruce said, this is just a starting point. So you use these tools and then take all those pieces into, now, from our unique perspectives, and think creatively. How can we take this information and present it in a unique or different way that would help our client solve their problem? And perhaps keep in mind that the client may not be familiar with some of these tools. So you may help them understand what you have just presented to them.
Yeah. One thing that I would add, I've talked to quite a few company representatives at the end of the project, asking them what do they find useful in those reports and what perhaps is not very useful. And so one thing that struck me that they always find the weaknesses section of the SWOT analysis particularly useful. They always say, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that, but you're right. So they kind of take that criticism sometimes very well, and they all know what their strengths are. In fact, that's something they always try to promote. But in many cases, they can overlook some things. Likewise, threats, for example. Yeah, like I didn't think about that. That's a good point. So do spend some time on SWOT analysis or competition analysis in general, because that section by itself may be very interesting to your clients. Another thing I would like also to add here, I noticed that many companies, especially this semester, ask to conduct some market sort of research or market survey. So if you are, I'm not sure what companies we have or students, what companies the students present here are working on, but most of the companies also say, why don't you go and ask a few potential consumers or a few potential partners what they think about our company. And so if it's a known company, just ask them if they know about us, whom they use as competition, or what kind of provider they use for the service or the product. Why, what would it take them to switch to us? If it's a lesser known company, they say, well, why don't you tell them a little bit about ourselves and ask them if they would ever want to buy a product from us. And so even if you talk only to potentially, let's say 2, 3, 4 friends or family, or maybe, I don't know, managers of stores, retailers, or just some random people on the street, you can learn a lot about that company's sort of competitive position. So if you tell them, for example, there is a company called, I don't know, Oasis Rocket, and they make smart pots for indoor plants, for example, for your office. Would you buy a product like this? If you hear back, oh yeah, of course, yeah, I love plants. I have some plants in my office. I really love this design. I really would like to buy it. You know that probably the company is onto something. And on the other hand, if the response is like, why would I buy a pot? I'll just get a plastic can and put the soil and plant in it. So then, yeah, maybe in this market, there will be not much demand for a product like that. And so even though you personally can maybe talk only to 2, 3, 4, 5 people at most, but if each of your team members talk to 3, 4, 5 people, you actually have a sizable sample, and you already start better understanding what the potential consumers, retailers, partners think about the company, and that allows you to better assess their position in the market, potential position, current position in the market.
So that's absolutely on target. And what I would add to that is, again, think creatively about where you might find your target consumers. So some of my students just completed a project where the primary target audience are older consumers, mid-60s and up. Now, we happen to be fortunate that where we are located, there's lots of those. And so what they did is they contacted a couple of the local retirement communities. Again, we have lots of them. And they asked if they come to their community meeting. And they did. And actually, they ended up getting invited to have lunch with some of the seniors. And so they walked away with about 35 or 40 contact points, and it took them less than 2 hours. And they had a good time. They got free lunch out of it and came away with a wealth of data. And another group of students in the same class, their target audience were young moms. And so they called the local middle school and asked if they could come to the PTA meeting. And surprisingly enough, they were welcomed with open arms to the meeting, and they gave them the first 45 minutes of the meeting to talk about their product and ask questions. So we were very pleasantly surprised at how open consumer groups are, or not necessarily consumer groups, community groups. If they introduce themselves as students doing this project, all of a sudden doors open that wouldn't if you were trying to sell them something.
Yeah. At the very least, it sounds like a very good experience for the students. They make new contacts, they learn new skills, they try themselves in a new, different role as a presenter, as a sort of company liaison. And I think the more you do it, the better you will be prepared for your own career when tomorrow you graduate, you have your own business or work for a company and you have to do it for a living. You sort of will know better how to go about these kinds of things.
It was. The networking worked out well. One of the retirees was actually a retired business guy who had sold his firm, and he liked one of the students so well that he referred them to the new owner, and he's now interning there. So it was just one of those things that worked out well.
Now, students, I see you have a lot of questions, and many of them are about X-Culture project. So what we do this week, some email questions, we'll get to those in a minute. But if you have questions specifically about competition analysis, about SWOT, PEST, Porter's 5 forces, again, you can either raise your hand or you can type your question here. And Baktash, I see your question. Let me try to add you here. Baktash is one of our special participants. He started off as a kid, so he was in the children's version of the program. Was getting older, then this semester is actually serving as a coach for the kids. And so he's in Kabul, Afghanistan, so sometimes his connection is very bad. But Baktash, I see you had a question about that SWOT analysis. Would you like to go ahead and ask it? And I hope his microphone will work. Go ahead, Baktash.
Hello, Dr. Terrace. Hello, Dr. Bruce. Hello, Dr. John. I'm Baktash Ghani from Afghanistan. I'm a high school student and currently a coach in X-Culture project. I hope I'm not off the topic. Moments earlier, we were talking about SWOT analysis, and I was wondering that recreating old animated movies into new movies like Lion King, Snow White, and all these things. Is this a weakness to Disney? Because it's important to somehow identify what are the, it can also be an opportunity. Well, I don't know. This is my question.
So you mean the fact that they have to go and recreate the old movies, is it a sign of weakness? They cannot
an opportunity.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
It is.
Very much so. I guess, I mean, it could be either. We won't know until we've seen the data. Without the data, we could sit here and we could discuss both sides of it and say, well, maybe it's a weakness, maybe they're running out of ideas. That's why they're rehashing old things and trying to make them new. But until we see the data on the success or failure of those particular projects, it's really difficult to say.
Yeah, and these movies storm the box office and they make lots of money. Maybe it's an opportunity because they're really good stories.
Well, and if we were looking at it from a risk perspective, Tosh, Disney, as well as Universal, actually, who's right next door to them in Orlando, they have a pretty in-depth understanding of what their consumers like. So they know that the Lion King, for example, or Frozen are hugely popular franchises, and they seem to be just about resistant to repeated use. And so I think they have pretty good data, a lot of which they probably are never going to share. But the fact that they continue to capitalize on these, I think that's an opportunity that they recognize they have, and they take full advantage of it. So I would say that it is a strength, but it is mostly them recognizing a opportunity that is unique to their firm, that there doesn't seem to be any limit to the Frozen franchise. every little girl in the United States can sing that song.
Yeah. All I can say that I just recently went and
But we
saw
can sing that song.
Aladdin. So even though I saw the original Aladdin, you know, the animated version, now I watched the one with oh, I forgot his name. But anyway, the new sort of movie Aladdin.
Will Smith.
Yeah, Will Smith. Right. And I actually liked it very much. I liked it very much. And yes, my kids can sing any of those songs. So yeah.
Over and over and over.
Yeah.
Well, and it also becomes an intergenerational connection. So there is a lot of strength in it. You know, whether or not that will wear out, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I guess, you know, for instance, for me, I look at something like when I didn't even go and see like Titanic, for instance. I mean, I guess, you know, I'm a little bit older. And so, you know, I've already seen like how many Titanic movies have I already seen? So when the Leonardo DiCaprio one came out, I just said, I don't need to see another Titanic movie. Yeah, just I don't need it. So I mean, but I'm probably very unique as part of the market. A lot of people wanted to go see it.
The museum in Belfast certainly does well. You would think that people would have had enough Titanic, but the museum
Really?
has hundreds of thousands of millions of visitors and are just fascinated by the story. So they don't seem to have worn it out yet.
Dia, Taras, I saw you raise your hands. Did you have questions? Please go ahead and mute your microphones. Go ahead with your questions.
Okay, hello.
Hello?
I'm Dia.
Yep.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about what was his name, Bhaktas. He talked about Disney recreating the movies, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what I wanted to ask is, can we also consider it as a strength? Because from what I've heard, is that Disney is trying to recreate each movie after 10 years, so each generation can actually have a, like, you know, can experience the movie in their form. So maybe that's possibly a strength, because that's what's attracting many people to go watch with their kids the movies. And also the fact that now, you know, before, how they would shoot the movie is different. Like The Lion King was animation then, right?
Yes.
Now it's no longer animation. Now it's like, I don't know, is it real life? Can you call it real life?
I don't know.
Actually,
they have a name for that new format. So kind of a mix of real 3D and whatever else they use there. Yeah.
So that's a really good question. I think a good example of what we were talking about a little earlier in analyzing the business environment. So one of the things that has changed the Disney dynamic this year is they now have their own TV channel.
Yeah.
So if we were going out and looking at the business environment for entertainment targeting that audience, Apple and the other streaming video services are going to lose that Disney content, and it's going to migrate to their channel. And so that might change the answer to your question, is it a strength or an opportunity? So I think they recognize they have a unique product that they can capitalize on and continue to reuse and reuse, particularly now that they own the delivery mechanism rather than somebody else owning the delivery mechanism.
So even if I like Netflix, if I want to watch Disney, I'll have to get a subscription for the Disney channel. And so this way they'll probably feed me more than just the Disney movies. They'll probably have all kinds of other content there. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, including that's arguably one of the reasons they bought Star Wars. Is the only place you'll be able to stream Star Wars movies once the contract with Netflix runs out is on the Disney Channel.
Huh.
So they recognize that they have a couple of unique opportunities there to integrate the supply chain, if you will.
Yeah. Well, at the very least, we see that they're trying and innovating, that's for sure. So they're not just sitting and enjoying the position. They're trying to use every possible opportunity and see what happens. Taras, you had a question as well?
Yes, yes. So my comment and question to my colleague professors is as following. From my experience, sometimes students miss opportunities for alternatives. So they talk about opportunities like, let's launch a new product, or here is let's do some new market entry, and they call it opportunity. So I'd like your opinion on that. How we really, what is opportunity in your perspective, and why do we need to have? So I like your comment on that.
So basically, where opportunity cost, how it fits in this model, right?
I mean, so strengths is, it's clear. It's if you are strong, if your company have strengths, weaknesses, it's clear. Threats, it's something is threatening. But then people mix opportunities with possibilities, and possibilities are like I can. So, for instance, if we're talking about Disney, it's a possibility to open a new park.
Right.
To introduce a new product line. So they would say, well, this is opportunity. But while you emphasize that opportunities are unsolved needs, weak competition, and what to do with all those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, that's the alternatives that you have to decide later.
Right. So an opportunity is an external thing. I don't know, John, Bruce, can you address that issue? Because it is a very important. There is a difference between opportunity and opportunity cost. Opportunity is not internal, it is external. So how does it all fit together?
If you don't mind, I'll say something to that. Is as you already said, Vas, it's external. Deciding to open a new product line, it sounds like a very internal type of gesture. Now, if I'm looking at the market, and I recognize that there is a need or a desire out in the market that is not being met, and that I have the strength and abilities within my company to do that, that becomes my, taking my strengths and, meeting an opportunity in the market. Just deciding to open up a new product line I don't know, that doesn't really make any sense to me. I could never make that decision. I've got to actually do the market research. I've got to find out, is that opportunity out there? And do I have the ability and the strengths in order to be able to do that? And can I do it faster than the competition? Can I do it, at a better price than the competition? So I've got to go out and find that opportunity. It's something external to my company, not something I'm not going to just invent a product and go out and do something because I can. I have to go out and find the opportunity out there and match my strengths with that.
Yeah.
I think this comes all the way back to where we started this conversation about 40 minutes ago with show me the evidence.
Yeah.
So do your homework. That perhaps PEST analysis or whatever tool you're using, but and I see the exact same thing, Taras, is students get excited about the project and they get engaged and they go, well, we're going to enter a new market, or we're going to create a whole new product or sub-product, a brand extension of some kind, and they get so excited about it that they forget that just because they're excited doesn't mean consumers are excited. And so come back to this whole idea of show me the proof, show me the evidence. And that may be quantitative and some of that may be qualitative. But show me the evidence that there's a market and that you can meet the market. So it's kind of funny how sometimes these things come back full circle to where you start a conversation.
And isn't it possible that sometimes students, after they wrote the competition analysis section and started working on marketing and then logistics and HR and whatever section, that sometimes it may be useful to keep coming back to that original section and maybe even update some of those positions as they understand more about the company? It's not set in stone, is it?
No. I mean, it's that's a very important point. I guess one of the things that is that so many people forget, also working inside companies, is that you have visions, of a company, and you have to always continue to go back to that vision and see, is what I'm doing, does it fit within the framework of the vision that I have? And sometimes you realize that, then, maybe it doesn't, or maybe at some points, you realize that maybe it's happened enough times that you have to go back and revise your vision of what it is that you think you are. But yes, always revisiting, what your origins are is very important, because sometimes you actually even have to change those.
Absolutely. So for the students, keep in mind that these projects that you're doing in the X-Culture assignment and similar ones you might do in other courses, and then when you graduate, things that you will do as a new employee, are almost always going to be iterative process. So you're going to start at the beginning by defining the product or whatever the start of the project is. And then as you start going through, don't forget that you need to go back and look at what you did in the first place and make sure that you're being consistent and that you don't need to make changes. Students have a tendency to, once they are finished with part A, go on to parts B, C, and D and never go back and look at part A. And so it's really important that as you get to the B's, C's, and D parts of the projects, that you go back and look at A and make sure you were right in the beginning. So I think Bruce is absolutely on target there.
Gentlemen, can I ask you then to stay here with us for the remaining 15 minutes? So there are some questions from the students about the process, so not related to competition analysis. And I wanted you to share some of your tips and suggestions. So this week, the students are asked to submit individual answers to all of the questions in the report. So one of the reasons we do it is because in the past, we did notice that students often would divide the workload in a way that each team member is doing an independent sort of section with the hope that everybody will be done by the end of the semester, and they will just copy and paste all of those sections into one document and submit it as one single document. And so what we would like the students to do is to collaborate on each question. And so the hope was that when we ask them to answer each of the questions individually, so if I have to think a little bit about a little bit about logistics, a little bit about HR, a little bit about marketing, I will, even if somebody else on the team will be responsible for those sections, I'll have some ideas and I will share them with the team members. But so the question is, how would you recommend they divide the workload up? Because that's now is when they're making those decisions. And I don't know, maybe there is some logic to simply dividing the workload so where each team member is responsible for a different section and then just copying and pasting it all into one document, or other better ways to do it. So what's your take on that? What recommendations do you give to your students?
Bruce,
in which order I'm gonna
go? Sure. I guess I'm definitely a supporter of what you were saying, Vas, and that is that I think it's very important that the students collaborate on every question. Simply because at the end of the day, you want everybody to be getting a full perspective and the full experience, as opposed to just being, narrowly focused on some little teeny part of the project. Is that easy to do? It's not always easy to do. Is it always possible to do? It's probably not even always possible to do. But I think it's incredibly important that students try their best to do it as often as they can, because this is where the learning experience really comes in, is that exchange of ideas on a centralized topic, where you're going to get, the cultural differences, all these variations on how to approach a problem and solve it. And that's the richness of what I think you can get out of this culture experience. Everybody doing their own thing, you don't have the interaction. You're not, there's no exchange. It's just, going into your cubicle, doing your work and, sending it along when you're done with it. And then somebody has some task at the end to make it all look as if it's the same thing. But, how much did anybody learn? Not much. Maybe the person putting it all together learned the most because they have to go through everything.
So I will dovetail on that and absolutely agree. We know that the research is very clear that while employers want you to be technically proficient in whatever it is your degree says that you just did for 4 years, whether it's marketing or finance or international business, they are also just as importantly looking for what we have been calling soft skills, and I was recently informed we are now supposed to call power skills. I'm not quite sure why, but apparently that's the case. And so things like communication, collaboration, interdisciplinary work, we're now calling power skills. So regardless of what we call them, we know employers are as interested, if not more interested, in a student that has those skills. So to what Bruce is saying, yeah, this is hard. and it's supposed to be hard. It's, you know, why we use X culture is it's hard. And so figuring out how to collaborate but still use your individual members' best skill. So if someone writes really well, or if someone's quantitatively strong, you let that person take point on their part of the project. But exactly as Bruce said, at some point, it has to look like it came out of the same consulting organization. And that it's not 5 reports that got stuck together. It's one report that we did as a collaborative team. So
on that, John, you said if somebody writes,
it is important.
Yeah, John, you said if somebody writes well, some professors, and again, I would like to get your opinion, some professors actually advocate a workload distribution by function, not by report section. They say, for example, let's say there are 6 people on the team. One is from the United States, is a native English speaker. Maybe that person should not be writing a section, but rather should be doing copy editing of all sections. Likewise, maybe it would be wise to appoint someone on the team to be a sort of timekeeper, coordinator, whatever you want to call it. So that person's job will be to check with everybody frequently, making sure that each section is progressing at a good pace, maybe send reminders from time to time and make sure that it all fits together. So would that be a wise approach? Maybe somebody will be doing like research online only, and then somebody else will be doing the initial write-up, and then somebody will be doing the copy editing. Or would it be more efficient to simply divide the workload by the section? You do marketing, you do HR, you do logistics, I will do some other section. So what's your take on that? I don't know.
If I may, we had this discussion yesterday with my students, and first of all, I would like to acknowledge to all students who listen that really you have a tough assignment. It's easier to make this study on your own than as a team, especially as the dispersed over the Earth team. And I'm sure that I can suggest that if 4 of professors who are here on the screen, if we would make a team, I'm not sure if we will manage to develop anything meaningful in half a year. Yeah, yeah, because it's also the time constraints, everything is the problem. So we discussed that, and of course, if it would be like you know, in ideal world, you would try to start from the end. What is the delivery at the end? What we want to have at the end? What tasks should be accomplished? And what is the most efficient? And just to make notes, maybe you can, of course, it depends also on the student literacy in digital literacy, because I think that if you use some notepads or whatever to tools that will help you to visualize the tasks, visualize what you're doing, then maybe you could visualize and add, for instance, you remember, well, we forgot that somebody has to do some other task. It just didn't come to my mind. So we put it on the list and they appear. And then actually you also know about Scrum, Agile approaches. In some period in a week, you address what new tasks appears, who can pick up on those tasks. So, but this is very much depending. That's why I started with the issue of communication within the team. The toughest thing here in the project, it's not about the international business, I believe.
Right.
It's about your communication and be able to communicate and really build on those experiences that you have, rather than hindering each other because of those experiences. So this is the toughest thing, and I just envy the opportunities that you have to discover the way out of it.
And as I always say, X culture is not a test, it is an exercise. It's an exercise in teamwork. And so while some students probably could have done a pretty good job working individually, that's not what the project is about. So it's about completing the assignment together, dealing with all of these issues and learning how to do it. Because even if you're very, very smart and you can do it alone, sooner or later you'll have to work in a team. And so that's what we're trying to prepare you for.
So, Taras, I think you said something very interesting and important. It's when you said this isn't necessarily about international business. And so, we could extend that and say it isn't necessarily about marketing or economics or finance or any of the other skills that we know it takes to make a successful X culture project. It's about that iterative process of learning how to work together and how to develop those communication and collaboration skills. To Vas's specific question, I'm an advocate of having the students divide the work based on what they do best, not necessarily a section. So again, if we have a really strong editor or writer, they should be the one that puts the document together. And if we have a finance major in the class or a finance minor, let them go to where their strength is. So the analogy I use in class is if we were building a house. I'm going to have a carpenter and a plumber and an electrician and those other kinds of skills. But at some point, we have to make sure that all those pieces fit together in a house you want to move your family into. And so I think it's for us that encouraging them not only for X Culture, but for other similar projects, that find those people who have the best or best at the skill sets you need and let them do what they are best at. And I think that's what they are going to experience out in the real world when they transition from our classroom to the workplace.
Yeah. A couple more procedural questions that students are asking about. Dia is asking if it's possible to prepare a PDF or some other notes of these webinars. Dia, it's a wonderful idea. It would be great if we could have text, some sort of transcript of these meetings. The question is who's going to do it, time. So I know I simply physically have no time. I'm sure other professors are busy, but maybe if somebody from the student group volunteered to do it, we would much appreciate it. One thing we are trying to do actually now is to write an X Culture textbook. So we have 44 professors contributing to it. And so one of the ideas is to not only use our own knowledge, but maybe some of the information from these webinars. And so some of the sections perhaps will address some of the topics that we talk about in the webinars. And so maybe there will be it will not be transcripts of webinars, but rather, a textbook that you can use based on the materials we discuss here. If everything goes fine, we should have the first draft ready for January, but again, it may be next year before we are fully done with this project. And Candia is asking about questions for Kim Ray. So Kim Ray or any other company students, if you have questions for the company, as always, you can just email those questions to admin@xculture.org. If it's a new question and we don't have that information, we will forward it to the company, ask for the additional information, and once it becomes available, we'll share it with everyone. So Candia, if you have any specific questions for Kim Ray, just send them to admin@xculture.org and we'll work with you, and then we'll try to get you that information. Importantly, sometimes students ask for information that not always can be shared. So often students ask for complete financial statements. And so most of these companies are private companies, not public companies. So information like this, they would be very reluctant to give you a full record. So there was one student who said, I'm an accounting major. I would like to see a complete financial statement for the last few years for Lady Bay Resort. We did forward your question to the company, but I will not be surprised if they will say that this information is a little too sensitive to be shared publicly. So we'll try, but no guarantees that we'll get all of those data points for you. Other than that, I guess we're pretty much out of time. We have the webinar with the coaches at 11 o'clock, and so they will be going live in a minute, and we can only do one webinar at a time. The system would not allow two. But John, Bruce, Taras, thank you so much for being here with us. The students, I'm sure, learned a lot today, and the recording will be available for everybody else to watch whenever they have time. Some of these webinars actually get thousands of views, from which I assume not only the X Culture students are watching them, but some external audiences too. Why not? Anybody can learn from you. I guess that's a good thing. All right. Well, thank you so much. And yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
Weekend students, and maybe some of these
have fun.
will join us.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck to the students.
Yeah,
Good luck.